Watch this. No way!
James, before we get into this pod,
Yeah.
I have 8 minutes and 40 seconds left on an item I'm bidding on. It is a classic ping answer putter.
See, it's an interesting one, that.
See, I've
And
put £23 and 9, and I'm the highest bidder right now.
Yeah.
And before, I don't want to get into the pod and then sort of make a panic decision without consulting you.
Well, I think this is the start of the pod, really. It's perfect. You buying a wand. I'm not really into. I mean, putters. I haven't really got putters.
I like my TaylorMade.
They can get quite expensive,
and I quite like the answers. A very similar profile I've had.
The problem with the old ping stuff, the original ping stuff, and the amazing thing about it is that we were all using much lighter putters then. So the old ping stuff, the head weights are actually sub 300 grams. You know, some of those ping answers about 280 grams, I think. This is quite an interesting one. It's a ping Y blade. And I went mad about these for a while. It's an absolute straight line. I don't know if you can see if I do that. It's straight into
the neck, isn't it?
Yeah, interestingly,
you've got to roll it well with that.
Interestingly, I've gone and
so
put
would you not put a bid in on this answer? Look at that! You've counterbalanced it.
I put a frequency filtered shaft in it. I must have been a really nice original pin grip. I've really been looking for one of them. It's pretty cool putter, actually. I forgot I had that. Yeah, I mean, it's fine to bid on them. You just got to bear in mind when it comes to actually using them, they are catastrophically light. You know, you look at the way that Seve used to putt with the old answer. He really is kind of, you know, he's having to work hard to create a strike. So it's quite a different way of putting. I don't know if you saw on GolfWorks recently, they put a Twitter video up of Tiger and Ricky Fowler doing a clinic, and Tiger picks up, you know, Ricky's got that big counterbalance putter now.
Yeah.
Tiger picks up that putter and he's like picked it up and he's having a few strokes with it. He's going, I can't move it. I can't get it to move.
It's weird because it's like counterintuitive to what you'd expect. Greens have got quicker, but we're using heavier putters.
Yeah, I mean, the counterbalance thing is really the response to quicker greens, I think, because the counterbalance really does take a bit of the strike out of it. But yeah, it's like I always say, you know, not all trends are progress, and I think you can see that with probably cover quite a bit of that today. You know, you can really see that with certain things. You can see it with, you know, certain aspects of what players are using today. For example, you know, the way that tour players really don't need fairway woods anymore. You know, fairway woods were a particular thing. You know, they did a particular thing, and it was very different to a driver. And now, as a result of tour players not needing fairway woods, the manufacturers produce really kind of low spinning hot 3 woods, which are ultimately geared up for tour players to use off the tee. And actually, the average player, that, you know, you and I and anybody else, what we really want is a fairway wood, you know, something that spins a bit, something that you can hit a shot off the deck with. And if you go back to when players were using proper fairway woods, they were using higher spinning woods, and a lot of the tour players would play then lower lofts, so they would get this kind of low launching, high spinning club that you could do quite a lot with. Yeah.
Well, we've got it
wedges
all to
have gone backwards as well.
We've got it all to unpack. So we have got our collaboration with SounderGolf Retro Golf Day at West Byfleet Golf Club. Trust me, that is more characters than you can squeeze into a tweet. We've got that coming up. That's only like a couple of weeks away. In fact, it's 2 weeks tomorrow. And I guess we've kind of been wanting to do this for a while, and we just got a bit lazy on the diaries, getting to urban golf. So we're doing it on Zoom, but a podcast talking about, I guess, kind of retro bags. Like, I'll be honest, I'm a complete layman when it comes to equipment, especially looking at retro kit. I can remember what I played with as a child. I felt kind of nostalgic towards that stuff, perhaps. I really enjoyed the day we had at Mention Hampton. I've loved the Mizuno TP11s that I've dropped in the bag. I played Persimmon Woods up in Scotland. I've started to kind of get the bug a little bit for this, but I wanted to put something out there that was a really cool bit of content with you, because you've got behind you like millions of golf clubs. It's quite overfacing. eBay is a big place. Golf Clubs for Cash is a big place. How do you go about doing this with a bit of structure? So we're going to dive into, I think, the different eras of golf clubs and how that's changed over time. How technology has shifted a little bit, what clubs look like 20 or 30 years ago. And we're going to kind of look at each area of the bag, top of the bag, irons, wedges, wands, you name it. So we're going to have to be fairly punchy. But before we dive into it all, James, why retro? Why old gear?
I think it's a really good question, and I think what I wouldn't say it's a pet hate, but I think it's when generally speaking, what happens is, well, I think when people look at using retro kit, they look at it as a really fun thing to do, but they don't look at it as, they almost look at it like they're not going to play well on that day with the retro kit. It's going to be so difficult to play, and it's just going to be a bit of a fun, and that it can be a bit frivolous. And I think that the resurgence that we're seeing and this kind of renaissance that we're seeing, more and more people getting into using older kit, is a really interesting thing. And I think that for me personally, I love using persimmon. I love using, I'm very into, as you know, the sort of mid 2000s, so that, I still use the super quad driver and all that sort of thing. And I think what I would encourage people to do is look at it from a sort of experiential perspective. Look at it as Patrick Boyd, who is the guy that owns National Custom, has a great quote, which is play what makes you love golf more. And I don't think that it's necessary to really, to say, oh, I only use persimmon, or I only use, early metal woods or whatever. But it's interesting to consider it from, what clubs do you enjoy hitting? And also, I know we're not going to get into the golf course stuff, but what clubs make the golf course that you're playing more fun? And a good example of that is the old course. And I play the old course all the time on the Sims. And the old course is miles more fun with persimmon, because what happens is you pick up a bit of nuance that you don't pick up with modern kit. You pick up this nuance where when you're using a persimmon driver on the old course, you've really got to kind of run it into spots and think about, really consider the type of shot you're hitting off the tee. And it makes the tee shots kind of as engaging as the shots into the greens. So it adds a whole dimension to the old course. Another example is I went down to Rye with Dave Griffiths, who, great player. And we played persimmon at Rye. And it was just completely different, because the thing with playing persimmon is, firstly, the big buzz with playing persimmon is when you hit a good one, when you really get one out the screws.
Great.
Oh my God, it's another level, isn't it? It's like,
it's a different feeling.
That sort of, that little buzz that you get from what we all chase after is definitely better when you get it with a persimmon, which is slightly because it's, it's harder to get, but it's just an amazing feeling with a persimmon with a steel shaft. But also the other thing that persimmon does is, like, if you miss one a little bit, you're a lot further back. If I suppose we should get into the performance part, but I mean, if I rip one with persimmon, I know exactly what my numbers are, as you know, because I'm hitting balls down here all the time, and I can get roughly 160 miles an hour of ball speed out of a fairly modern driver, and probably all the modern drivers, but I'm about 10 miles an hour less with a persimmon. But on a links course on a dry day, if I get a persimmon going down there with a little bit of draw and I really hit a good one, you can hit it 300 yards. You can get it going. But if you miss one, you're 100 yards further back. So trying to play, and
you're off the planet as well. You are off the planet.
Yeah, you're a lot, but then but because you lose so much distance, you don't get into the trouble as much. And so what ends up happening at Rye is you're kind of all of a sudden, a hole that you're used to hitting an 8-iron into, all of a sudden you've now got to try and hit some persimmon fairway wood and sort of really play the averages, really say to yourself, okay, I'm going to try and bang this one up there and get it up the right side of the green and hope it bounces off that slope. And so it adds another level of scrambling. I think with the sort of modern-ish fairway woods, metal fairway woods, we can hit shots like we're hitting an iron shot. And you can kind of try and flight it up there. And that's why the old course is less engaging with modern kit as well, because you really are just trying to fly it over stuff and, trying to get it into these slightly different places. But with a persimmon fairway, you are very aware of what the ball needs to do on the ground, is what I would say. With drives as well, you become very aware of what it needs to do on the ground, and it's great fun. It really is good fun.
Yeah, I love doing it. I mean, I love taking the persimmons out around the, those honesty box courses, the kind of the Hebrides stuff with Tom earlier this year. And I played around Machrihanish with that. And you know Machrihanish really, really well. I used to be a member there. It's a tough test tee to green. I just hit the ball really, really well with the persimmons that day. But the feeling of reward was next level. But I was still getting it out there. You know, I was sort of front edge on 18. You know, you catch them well, the ball, you get the reward. But it does feel like it's a bit of a tightrope walk. You know, there's the difference between good and bad is so great. It's certainly at the top end of the bag. Look, we're going to dig into it all. I want to, through this, try and pull out a couple of connoisseurs picks that you would ask, you know, you try and get people to keep an eye on as they're kind of building their sets. But how would you kind of first look at the eras? And I guess, where do we start? Do we look at post World War II in terms of the eras and the, you know, how you'd categorize them? You've got the mid 2000s there. You've clearly got the sort of the pre 460cc head days. There's early steel headed drivers. You've got different types of blades, different forging. There's all sorts of different eras in here. Now I've got no idea how you'd categorize us.
Well, I guess my particular area of expertise is sort of late 80s onwards. I was born in 1980, but believe it or not, I've been fanatical about golf since I was about 8 years old. And also for me, equipment, I've always been a gearhead. You know, I've always been into the equipment. So I guess that brings me in. I can remember when you know, the first metal woods were coming out, TaylorMade burner, but also during that era, that's kind of when I probably was starting to play golf. But during that era for a long time, for 10, 12 years, you know, still a lot of players use persimmon because the early metals were actually really, really difficult to hit. So I got a bit of persimmon. I played persimmon as a kid, and luckily in my early days as a trainee, I was able to work on persimmon and can do kind of basic refurbs and reshafts and things like that. So I would think I'm lucky to have had that experience. And I'm not really, I haven't really delved into the stuff earlier than that. I haven't really delved into hickory. I've hit hickories a few times, but I've not caught that bug. I've probably just sort of stayed away from it a bit. But my particular thing that I like is I love great looking persimmon drivers with very stiff steel shafts. You know, I feel that if I play, I've got one behind me actually. I've got this Max Fly one, which has got a graphite shaft in it.
Well, we're starting off here in the top end of the bag, aren't we? So let's go for it. Let's roll into this then. So top end of the bag, if you're building it. Firstly, when we talked about persimmons, I came down and I've still got your Cleveland persimmon driver.
Yeah, and that's one of the golden gamers as well. So
you said it's like kissing frogs persimmons. Like you've got to, like, they all behave radically differently. So you've got to just keep trying them almost.
Yeah, so I've got about 50 persimmon woods behind me, and at the bottom, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can't really hit that one, but I do love it. 6. There's like 7 or 8 that are ones that I can really play. And you know, this one here is an interesting one because I don't use it very much. I have used it in the past, but this is a gorgeous Max Fly tour issue. That's called a Max Fly 901, but I would imagine this is probably made by Tab Moore or someone like that. It is a beautiful shape, but it must have been right at the end of persimmon and somebody that was really hanging on tour, because it's got the old G Loomis tour shaft, which is pretty niche, but it was G Loomis shafts for, like, you know, in the early days of graphite, were the best graphite shafts. It's got a sort of 70 gram G Loomis shaft, and it's 44.5 inches. And I tell you what, this one, you can get this going a long way. But going back to that thing about the experience and the feeling, I just feel like it's a sort of slightly muted club compared in terms of a feeling compared to playing the sort of steel shafted, the sort of stiff steel shafted ones. So, you know, like you say, even, you know, stuff like this, which is a world master, which is a whole story about these. When I've
is that one that's Duval's?
Yeah, this is the Duval one. You know, this is, if I had to really kind of pick a persimmon in terms of the way that the face is a bit onset from the hosel, the way it sits, the depth of the face, the shape of it, everything about this is just beautiful. But I can't hit it, which is a real shame.
High tower stuff, that one. Why is that? Just because there's the onset and it's just crazy stiff shaft?
it just hasn't got enough loft on it, basically. I don't mind the crazy stiff shafts. Weird with steel shafts as well in persimmon woods. You can go, they don't if you don't get them really stiff, they don't feel stable. So a lot of the ones that I'll end up using are really stiff. So yeah, this one just hasn't got enough loft on it. It just I can sort of just about get it to fly if I hit a fade, but it's too hard to hit. If I mishit it and get some catastrophic duck hooks, just no spin.
So how do you decide whether you're going to be a persimmon player? If you're building this set, if you're at home and let's say you've got a moderate interest in retro gear, but you haven't really, you haven't gone to the depths that I'm looking at behind you. How do you make the decisions here? Because you could very quickly throw 300, 400, 500 quid away, just accumulating different persimmon woods, different drivers, buying all sorts of odds and ends and tabs and stuff online. Like, how do you actually go after stuff that's, because half the point of this is it's not a joke. It's not just, I've just put some old clubs in the bag and I'm just going to see how I get on. It's trying to curate a set that's cool and feels like, you know what, I can play this and I can still play competitively.
And I think that is that is the cost of doing business. It's like you do have to buy a few. I've got quite a lot of saved searches on eBay. I think if somebody, my recommendation would be that if somebody wants, I think if somebody's got like a moderate ball speed, probably, and you want a sort of the first one, I'd look for a Joe Powell. The thing with the Joe Powells, the early Joe Powells is, I've bought a few, and that one's not in very good condition. Let's see if I've got a better one. Here's a reasonable one. Oh no, that's a good one. That's a good one at the top. Okay, so I've bought a few of these, and these are, they're pretty consistently decent. If you get one with an S3, this one's got an S3 in it.
S300 shaft you're talking about, right?
Dynamic Gold S300. It's in pretty good shape. They're a lovely head shape. And generally speaking, just these stock ones, which actually, so this is just a standard Joe Powell Classic PT1W, it says on the bottom, but this is like the standard Joe Powell Club. Now you can pick these up on eBay for, to be honest with you, if I put one of these on eBay, which I did a few weeks ago because I've got a few of them, they don't really sell. You pick one up for like 50 quid on eBay, and as long as you're, if you're kind of somebody that gets, say, like 140, 150 miles an hour ball speed on the modern driver, these are going to be pretty good. I find for me, probably these have probably got a little bit too much loft and aren't quite aggressive enough. I want deeper face in this, but these are a really good start point. And then see where you get to.
And you're looking for a decent shaft in it, like an S300 or something, just something steel shaft and with a bit of weight, right? Because you can't reshaft these things, can you? Just like, I know that's a stupidly obvious question, someone like you, but you've got to find someone to redo the binding, haven't you?
They're really difficult to reshaft. You have to find somebody in those. There are people around that know what they're doing, and that can do it. But it, even there's a level of jeopardy in reshafting these. The main thing that is difficult is that, imagine that the reason that you've got this binding here is that it's got a wooden hosel, and when you're taking the shaft out, the top bit of this wooden hosel is so thin, it's so easy to crack them. And then you get into, you're trying to fix cracks, you're drilling little holes and putting wood filler in them, and they really are on life support at that point. I've got one. My favourite persimmon driver is on life support at the moment. Has been for a while.
Cleveland one that I've got that I keep leaning on tee boxes.
That's making a noise, isn't it? No, the one that I've got that's on life support is a Dunlop, which was done by Tad Moore, and it is just perfect. And I've had brilliant trips at Macrahanish with that driver, and I can hit that thing really good. But yeah, you've got to, I could show you a couple of woods here. I mean, this one in particular, I bought this fairly recently. This is absolutely, it's just, it's one of my favorite things. It's an old Honma. It's a Honma Tour model, which is obviously the ones they made for the Tour. And it's got a good stiff shaft in it. I put one of these retro Lampkin grips on, which I thought was quite cool. And I hit this pretty good. I took it out with your friend and mine, Maddie Dyke, a few weeks ago, and I hit it pretty good, but I just don't hit it anywhere. The one that I've been gaming is this Mizuno, which is, luckily, it's a pretty lightweight head, and I did actually reshaft this one, and it's a pretty the head's pretty light, so I've built it a bit longer. I've got it all the way up at 44.5 inches. I've got an X1 Dynamic Gold in. Now this thing goes 20 yards further than that Honma.
That's so weird, isn't it? It's just because I suppose they are a little bit more artisan in the makeup of the build, right? So there's a higher variance in terms of what they get. Whereas if you put, the best modern drivers across the last few years, you don't get a massive spread. You don't see 20 yards difference very easily, not unless there's a purposeful difference in terms of whether it's built for draw bias or whatever,
Yeah, and it's spec spread. It's not necessarily that one's got some voodoo in the head that makes it go further. It's just that it's the specification of the club. What's great about that, the Mizuno one that I'm gaming, which is Mizuno, I think it's TP11 Mizuno. No, it's TPAW Tour Proven. Yeah, it's not my most beautiful club, I say, but it is. If I need to play,
Close.
It's the one that I hit best. Yeah.
So what do you do if you're not a persimmon guy? So if you're not a persimmon guy, where do you go next?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other
are they
thing
cack? You said the early steel-headed shafts, steel-headed drivers were a bit cack.
But I think the other thing, one more thing on persimmon, if you don't mind, I would encourage everyone to try out a persimmon 5-wood and tell me it's not miles better than your hybrid. There is no club, there is no club in the history of golf that comes out of the rough better than a persimmon 5-wood. It's absolutely unbelievable. I mean, it's. I don't think I've actually got. I've got that Wilson one. Yeah, I've got this beautiful little Wilson one. The shape of, because the head's really small and it's got that kind of, call it the happy face sole. That really rounded sole. Persimmon 5-woods come out of the rough. They're just unbelievable.
Feels like they cut through it as well. I've got the 4-wood, which is a bit rinky dinky. I think it might be the wrong shaft or something. It always wants to go left on me, but the bottom, the leading edge is sharp, so it feels like you can attack down on it. Like you say, you can be a bit more creative. Whereas the ones, the modern fairway wood is so low profile, it's built for picking it off the turf, from 250 on the fairway.
Yeah, and the hybrids as well get really caught, and they get kind of caught up like an iron out of the rough. So, don't you remember the original baffler, the Cobra one with the rails on the bottom, and there was another wood.
Adam's tight lies were big, weren't they?
Yeah, they were good, but there was another wood called a Ginty, which was an early persimmon, and basically the Ginty is the shape that the remember the first Callaway Warbird soles and the Callaway Big Bertha, which were good out of the rough. The sole of that club, which was patented by Callaway and everything, and was totally based on a Ginty, which was a persimmon. Yeah,
fascinating. So then, if you take us into maybe some of the early steel-headed or metal-headed.
Yeah, early. I think
drivers. So I'm pushing on you. I've seen you share like a Titleist PT and stuff like that, but you're really not passionate about this stuff. So what you're saying is, if you're building this from the ground up, try and do persimmon and then work backwards. I used to hit.
I think
as a kid, I had a Mizuno Tezoid driver. Must have had that for 8 years. Tiny head, same as a fairway wood. It was just a 1-wood. I remember that. I'm sure it was toilet. I mean,
Tezoid, like the thing with the Tezoid was mega hard to hit. I mean, if you had to be a bit of a ball striker to get that thing to fly in the air.
Guilty.
It was really, I mean, it was a good driver, but you had to be a certain type of player. And the other thing with the Tezoid was tremendous fairway woods. If you get one of those Tezoid 3S, the green headed one, Tezoid 3S with a steel shaft, they're great. They're really great. But look, I mean, this is the original TaylorMade burner. It's got the old Tour Gold shaft in it. Early graphites. Again, this speaks to that thing of like, don't use stuff just because it's funky and all the rest of it. Because like, if you think about the experience of playing golf with one of these original Tour Gold graphite shafts, there's terrible shafts. They're really, truly terrible shafts. So the two things to watch out for: don't get sucked into playing Bellatas, whatever you do. Bellatas are rubbish. If you just get a Bellata and tap it up and down on the face, you'll struggle, right? It's all over the place. Modern balls are better. They're more fun to play with. So don't be discerning from the perspective of, don't do it just because it's retro. And similarly, these early graphite shafts, they're terrible. They've got loads of torque in them. They move about all over the place. They're just not very good. And these early metals are particularly hard to hit. They're harder to hit than persimmons, but in the drivers, that is. So the original burner, the best looking one, is the old early Titleist PT.
They're
And
smart looking heads though.
oh, they're so cool, and they're the best finish. You know, that beautiful satin finish. But some of one thing I will say is that some of the fairway woods, which we'll get into, are still brilliant to this day. And this thing here is, see, I'm debating what to use on our retro day, because this thing here, this is a Titleist PT, but they made a mid-size head, and it says ML on it, which I think is mid-launch. They made a high launch one as well, and it's a little bit bigger. It's than the sort of original TaylorMade burn. I'm just looking now. It's about 25% bigger. And this one, for some reason, if you've got some real nerds listening, they will remember an early Mitsubishi shaft that was made with TaylorMade for the tour, called a Shax, and it was this sort of iridescent finish. And the Shax had the gold writing on. Vijay Singh loved the Shax. It's the original anti-hook shaft. Vijay played it for years, and they made a slightly softer version, which was called an Iverx. That's weird, isn't it? And it's got silver writing on it. And I had this kicking about. And one afternoon, as you do, I just sort of thought, I'm going to put it in that mid-sized Titleist PT head. Well, this is an absolutely brilliant driver. I use it all the time on the sim, and I use it a bit outdoors. When I get this going, it's nearly 45 inches, so it's kind of, you know, it's a good shaft. This shaft would stack up against any of the modern shafts. So even though it's a shaft from, say, the early 2000s, I have to admit it's pretty, you know, it would work. It would hold its own around, you know, any modern day shaft. But in this club, it is just an absolute joy. I've got the old Victory,
great grip,
Victory
half chord as well.
Yeah, thickened up under the right hand, you know, old school tour van style. And this is a great club. I absolutely love it. But this is probably the only one of those sort of early metal woods that I've ever loved. And I do love this club. It's one of my favorite clubs. And then you get into the fairway woods. So then you've got, like,
we could do 3 hours on Sonatech, and we are not doing 3 hours.
No, we're not
on
into that. We're not into that area yet, mate. We're before that. So we're looking at early metals. So these original Titleist PT fairway woods. This particular one is the through ball, the same as the one that Tiger used. They're fabulous. You know, they're really fabulous. I mean, for a long time, I really couldn't find a persimmon 3-wood that I liked. So I was kind of using these with my persimmon, which a lot of players did back then. You know, there were a lot of players that played a persimmon driver with a metal fairway wood. Yeah, that was quite common. But these original Titleist PTs, I mean, they're just gorgeous. You know, there's never been a better shape. And don't forget, these ones, the original Titleist PT, carried on tour for years. You know, even when Titleist got into titanium woods, there's one called a 970, which is basically the exact Titleist PT head, but just painted black, so it looked like the modern
now
one.
We're looking familiar. So what you're showing now is much more familiar with, like, the driver that everyone owned, which was like the 975D, I want to say.
Yeah, so there's a small patch in between that we should just fill in, that we won't get into, which was that sort of the bit that you're talking about with the Tezoid, which is you know, sort of bigger headed metal woods, and there's not, I really can't think of a kind of great club. There's definitely nothing particularly in my rack that gets into that period. And what happened is there was this little moment before titanium woods really took off in the mass market, which really started with the Great Big Bertha. And this is a bit niche, but it was these. You'll see pictures. Actually, funny enough, very sad to hear that news about Sir Michael Benalik. But one of the pictures that the RNA put on their press release was Benalik hitting a driver, and it is one of these.
Oh wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so you started to see these springing
Mizuno
up on
Pro 300S.
Yeah, so you started to see these springing up on tour again. Big Vijay Singh
Much
was
bigger
big
head.
Much bigger. Well, these are the first titanium woods. There was a Casco one as well. So these Casco VS tours.
And sorry for stating the bleeding obvious, but you know, it's important, you know, to not skip by the obvious stuff. The titanium heads are bigger because it's a lighter metal, and it allowed the manufacturer to increase the face size and increase the size of the head as a result.
Yeah. So what happened is you started to see these springing up on tour, but you really didn't see them coming into the mainstream because at the time, the titanium, I think it was so expensive to make titanium clubs. They kind of didn't really come to the mass market. And then when did you start playing golf, Sam?
I'm going to say in earnest 93, 6 or 7 years of age I was playing, but I would have been 6 or 7. So
Yeah.
which I
So
was
that
when I
really
was 6
was
and
that
7.
was
So I was using Young Guns were my first set of clubs. The first
yeah.
grown-up set of clubs I had were, I think I had a I don't know if you can call it a fitting, but I tried loads of stuff. And it was a big birthday present for me when I was like 12 or 13. And I think I got Tezoids through the bag. 1, 3, and 5 wood, 3 to sand wedge. And then I think I had an Odyssey Rossi putter. And I used those all the way until I was probably 20.
Did you so you had the Tezoid forged irons?
I had the ones with the muscle back. Yeah, I think the
Yeah, the forged one. They're a great iron.
they had a couple of series of them. I had quite an old one, whereas when they went into a modern look, they started to push that little muscle back thing.
Yeah, it got
In the
flatter.
middle.
Yeah,
It got flatter
yeah,
into the head. So I had one of I think the first sort of set of those. And I loved them. And I've never been a big gearhead to change a load of equipment. And I actually,
no, found
because
that
we've
out,
been
didn't
through
we?
the
When we tried to
process.
change your equipment, I
Well,
wish we'd
yeah,
never
I'm
bothered.
like really weird with it. I don't like changing kit. It scares me. So I just
Yeah,
stuck with them, but I never went through. I always had friends that would turn up with the even greater Big Bertha, on the range and stuff. And you'd see these things evolve around you. But when I was 16, 17, I was still playing junior golf with my Mizuno Tezoid one wood.
yeah. Well, so that you've got that Mizuno Tezoid one where then Great Big Bertha comes along, and I
That's the game
remember
changer, right? This is a watershed
uh,
moment in golf clubs.
absolutely, it totally mad. I remember this. I don't know. I've got this. There's loads of things I don't remember, but when it comes to golf equipment, I just remember everything. But so the Great Big Bertha comes out. Now this is when the Great Big Bertha came out. It used to have on the bottom, it used to say Ruger Titanium, and at that point, Great Big Bertha was 550 quid in the shops. Bear in mind the Big Bertha.
Really?
Yeah, the Big Bertha. So the normal Callaway driver was 189 quid. People just didn't spend 500 quid on drivers then. And so it
That's
came out,
crazy
and I
with
remember,
inflation. That's crazy. That's like
yeah, it's
£1,000
nuts,
driver today at
and
least.
it's because titanium was so expensive. And then what happened is, a bit boring, but Ruger titanium was a type of titanium, and I think what happened is Callaway bought the foundry, and they got the price down to between 3 and 350 quite quickly, and that was when. But the thing I want to tell you about this is, I can remember being a junior at Stoke Poges, down on the range. There's loads of good players there. And somebody had the demo Great Big Bertha that came out of the shop. And the first time you hit one of these, the thing that was striking was all of a sudden hitting driver was accessible to everyone. There was loads of people that couldn't hit driver before this point, just because you couldn't get them to go in the air. And the striking thing about these was they went so high, they were so easy to flight. And that is, it's a massive moment in terms of kind of golf equipment being more playable for the average player. And I would argue that hasn't always been the case since, but these definitely made a huge difference to the average player.
For the club golfer, that it was the biggest leap, really, would you say, in the last 20 or 30 years in golf club technology? The moment where it was like, that was just a complete game changer overnight.
Yeah, for sure. And we've done like videos testing these. So just to go back to the performance bit, not that it is all about performance, but let's always talk about these clubs and say, what's the performance and what's the pleasure? This particular one, I believe this one was Warren Bennett's. It's a Great Big Bertha 9 degree, and it's got one of these RCH 36 beastie shafts that they just did for the tour. It's 45 inches long. If I hit this on the sim, so really what's happening here is, so if you go early titanium woods, up to about, for argument's sake, let's say early 2000, so 2003. If you take some of these early titanium woods in that period, you're definitely leaving a bit on the table. So you're using them for pleasure, and I would argue they don't really give you that much of a lift in pleasure over stuff which is kind of on the limit. So these, if I hit this in the sim, let's say if I can get 160 with a really modern driver, I can only get 155 with this. It's quite a nice club to hit, but you know, you're up at 45 inches. You've got a graphite shaft. You're not getting that kind of real, like, I am in touch with what's going on here that you might get with a persimmon or an early metal.
Whereas if I said,
So
pick me a club 25 years ago that closest resembles a modern day driver, you'd pull that off the shelf and be like, yeah, there you go. That's as good as it was, but it's not going to stir your soul when you hit it.
no, and I would say the only driver then at the same time as this, you know, TaylorMade had the burner. There was a titanium burner. I played that as a kid. That was all right, but it's not. Bledge is into that club, by the way. Bledge loves the old titanium burner. So bubble burner, but then so they made a titanium one. So at that point, all the manufacturers were making a steel head and then a titanium head, and the titanium one was much more expensive. So Bledge loves that club. So, you know,
okay. So I'm going to round out top of the bag and I'm going to move us on into the iron shortly.
But then wait a second, because the only one from that era that is worth anything, which you'll notice I've got a lot of, is the old Titleist 975D. I mean, I think if somebody's building a retro bag, a lot of people, you know, that thing that you said, a lot of people will look back at these drivers very fondly. You know, they're like old girlfriends, aren't they? The one you never quite know at the time which ones you're going to remember in 30 years. But you know, that's what these are really. I think a lot of people look back at these clubs fondly, and rightly so.
They're like avocado bath suites, aren't they? You know, there's like everyone had them for a period of time. Like everyone had that driver.
Yeah, and without getting too nerdy, I think it's worth saying that the interesting thing about the early Titleist metals was that they work for a certain type of player. You know, so go back to what I was saying about the Great Big Bertha. Those things they were moon balls. You know, they went so high. But with the Titleist stuff, because it was a through bore head, what's always striking is when you take the shaft out of one of these, you've got a huge amount of shaft inside the head, so inside the hosel. So the hosel's long and it's a through bore. So you've got, you know, 3.5 inches
through
of
bores
shaft,
where you
which
see
is
the black bottom in the hosel.
Yeah,
so
and what that does is it makes the shaft play very stiff in the tip. So all of a sudden, this is a titanium wood, which good players who had been struggling to keep the early Great Big Berthas down, all of a sudden could hit these, and it was like, wow, I can really flight that. And there was quite a lot of time. There was a few Titleist Tour players that really couldn't get this in the air. Brad Faxon was one of them. And what they would do with Brad Faxon's one of these is they wouldn't put the shaft all the way through. They'd only put it halfway in and then they just fill the bottom in, and that helped him to get the flight out of it.
No way. Whereas now the modern day clubs is just there's so much control over the shaft production that it's like we don't need to do through bore or anything like that. It's just a bit odd.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the through bore is really gone now, hasn't it? It's a more difficult thing to manufacture. It adds a whole step because you've got to kind of get that shaft flush at the bottom. And a lot of the persimmon drivers were through bore, and there's something to be said for it. But we don't see it anymore because all drivers are adjustable now, so
interchangeable and stuff.
I'd like to think that
I've got to give you a minute on Sonatec. We can't do this top of the bag and
I think we've got to go.
Surely.
We've really got to go up to, I think we've just got to go up to 2004 on drivers, because you know, when you get to 2004, there is this beautiful era that came about where we had the old TaylorMade TP 425, then we had the TaylorMade Super Quad. Those were beautiful shaped heads. They just starting to get the start of adjustability, you know, in terms of the weights, the screw-in weights, which, you know, never a massive fan of, but they are so handy when it comes to getting the thing to be the right swing weight and having access to the inside of the head. But, you know, I'm a massive fan of that era. And the most important thing to say about that era is heads really were on the limit there. So you can, if you like the look of those heads, you can totally play those in a modern golf bag. And as you know, I do. You know, this is one of my super quads. This is my absolute perler, which is having a little spell in the sin bin at the moment, but it might be coming out again soon. A bit of a
sabbatical, yeah.
Yeah, but I've got another one which is still the same head, but just a lower loft and a different shaft. So not, you know, I'm not. But I mean, I use this club, and I test it against all of the really up to date stuff.
Why do you love the head shape so much? Just talk. I don't.
It's just perfect, you know.
Like I don't look at clubs quite like that. So
yeah, it's just a lovely head shape. You know, it's a lovely round shape. It's got a nice deep face, and you know, I think the thing for me is I would also say that I've probably been a bit left behind by modern kit, because it's interesting to note the way that things change over time, sometimes just for the sake of change. So if you look at a lot of the drivers that people are using, it's coming back the other way now, but there's this trend to move towards stuff that looks really big behind the ball. You know, they look like frying pans. And what that does is it puts the center of gravity a long way from the shaft. And for me, it just makes the heads really slappy. And also the heads are very low spinning now. So it's a big part of the reason why a lot of the tour player, everyone's going, oh, there's this new trend towards everyone hitting a fade. It's like, well, the reason they hit a fade is the only way they can get the ball to stay in the air. And that's really like a modern driver thing. So my ball striking hasn't evolved with the modern kit, which is, and I, you know, I don't really like the look of it. I just think these super quads and the TaylorMade 425 are really the peak. And there's a few other great heads from that era as well. Like Adams made the, what was it? The red line
425.
TaylorMade
Put some of
TP
these down in the
425.
show notes, and then an Adams driver.
Adams red line RPM. This one, which I've sprayed blue.
Looks like some of
weird.
the Thunderbirds.
Yeah, but this was a great driver. Adams also did some drivers called Launch Lab at that time. There was a great head designer, I can't think what his name is at the moment, who designed a lot of these clubs. But I think these were the peak of metal woods, you know, from a sort of performance meets aesthetic meets pleasure of hitting a shot perspective. I think what happened after this is performance didn't go forward very much, but pleasure went backwards quite a lot when you go up to the modern stuff that we're on now. And obviously at that time, that's also the period that, you know, Sonatec was about. And the thing I would say about and the, you know, the Adams, some of the Adams fairway woods, like the red line, it's called a 4060, which I've got one off, but it's over there. Tour issue Adams heads at that time were really tremendous, but the Sonatecs really were brilliant. And I can remember seeing a Sonatec for the first time when we actually were lucky enough to play with Luke Donald when he just first got on tour. And he had an early Sonatec, and it didn't even say Sonatec on it. It was one of the really early prototypes. It had some other name on it. It wasn't Royal Collection, which is the Japanese company that made them. It was something else. And when they came out, you know, those are the original rip hot fairway woods, you know. And the problem with the Sonatecs is if you just go and buy one off of eBay, and I think one of the things that's a real shame about them is that they, generally speaking, when they came out of the factory, didn't sit very well. A lot of them would sit really toed in. So I've probably got behind me, I don't know, 30 Sonatecs, and about half of them I've adjusted to get them to sit really good. And generally speaking, what you have to do is buy a slightly higher loft in order to get them to have enough loft on them after you've bent, after you've bent the face open a little bit. But just great fairway woods, and you know, really, really hard to beat. There are some TaylorMade fairway woods from this period of time, tour issue TaylorMades, which have got a bit of a cult following. But Sonatecs are just, if you can get your hands on like I think the SS07, which is the one again. VJ was really good on equipment, is really good on equipment still, I'm sure. But VJ loved the SS07, and the good thing about the SS07 is, I've got one right beside me. Long hosel, which is completely bendable, very easy to bend. So they're really good because you can get them sitting pretty good. They've got a slightly smaller face, so you could say they were a bit harder to hit.
The other would be SSO3, is it?
SSO3, and that's another great one. And then the last one that they made, which was I made this one yesterday with a real bougie shaft in it. The shaft's worth about 5 times as much as the head. But yeah, the SS 3.5, and then there was an SS 2.5, which is a shallower face. These are the ones where sometimes, you know, if you get lucky, you can get one of these in 15 degree or 14 degree, and it will actually sit pretty good straight off the bat. But you know, you just have to get lucky. It's a bit like kissing frogs, but again, no money. You know, pick these up for 40 quid. You know, okay. I don't really want to let the cat out of the bag, to be honest with you.
Okay, so I'm pinning you down here. Driver Joe Powell Persimmon and fairway wood. You would urge people to a sort of a sharp soled Persimmon fairway as well with a steel shaft.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If you want to start kissing frogs, you can go more exotic than that. But if you're looking to just get into the game, I would say a good place to start would be a Joe Powell classic driver, maybe even just a metal fairway wood, like either a TaylorMade burner 15 degree or a Titus PT 15 if you can find one.
Sold.
And then if you want to get more exotic than that, it's difficult. You know, that a lot of people are really big fans of the McGregor stuff, but I've never really got into the McGregor stuff. I mean, there are some nice ones, but they're generally speaking too expensive, and there's a lot of collectors out there. So some of the Mizuno persimmons I think are really great. So yeah, that's
sold.
That's right.
So that's rounded out the top of the bag. You talked about Japanese stuff a little bit through there. You touched on some of the characters as well, like Tadmore, I think, and some of these other people. It feels like a nice segue into irons, and maybe within that, can you cover off a little bit about, you know, Japanese forging? You know, Japanese blades are obviously so sought after. No idea why. How have the construction of irons changed materially? What are people looking at today versus retro, which feels like we're looking in that sort of 80s to 2000 era again? You know, give me just the sort of the 30,000 foot view of irons.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is I think that all of this comes with the caveat of you do have to get you trying to get stuff to work straight out of the box when it's 30 years old is a bit tricky, because generally speaking, somebody's messed around with them. So if you're going to use this stuff, you've kind of got to find a club maker and try and get them to just level out the specs for you. You know, check the loft and lies, make sure they're the right weights, put some decent grips on them, and just get them into a state where they're reasonable.
And that's not too expensive, is it? Like, obviously,
no, not really. I
mean, you can go mega boutique, but there's usually a guy in a pro shop that can check your loft and lies, grips, all that sort of stuff. It's not crazy bucks to do that sort of stuff.
No, and try and make sure that they've got the right shaft in them. All this stuff about shafts deteriorating, I don't think they do. I mean, I've never found that to be the case. But then I reshaft most of the stuff anyway, so who am I to talk? But I reshaft all of it. But the thing I would say about irons is, look, whether it's retro, whether it's modern day, whatever, forged irons are the best. Now, if you look at what's happened with forged irons over the last 10 years, the whole of all of the major manufacturers basically are either forging in China, or doing what Mizuno are doing. And what Mizuno do is the thing that they sort of trademark as their form forging thing. Basically, what that is they get the head much closer to the end result in the original forge stamping process. And the reason that they do that is it means that the head requires a lot less hand finishing at the end. And that's the only way that they can stay competitive and be able to produce a forged iron. So there's a real case to be made for, if you want to use really nice forged irons and you don't want to spend Miura money, you kind of need to buy something a bit older, because that's the only way you're going to get the real proper forged stuff. It's very interesting to consider the difference
been in China. I don't understand.
Well, because there's not, that.
Is there like a
hand,
sort of is it almost like generations of knowledge of constructing it? Like,
exactly, yeah. So that hand finishing bit is pretty. I mean, it's a really highly skilled thing to do. There are some reasonable things coming out, but I mean, to be honest with you, I won't name names, but it's very hard for the big guys to do decent, really good forged heads. It's very hard for them to do it. So if I get a set in from whoever, to be honest with you, I won't really do it. I won't really work on them. It's just that the consistency's not there. The hosel depths are usually a bit funky. They're just, they're just not quite up to scratch. And I understand that that's market forces and all the rest of it, but there's a reason why Miura irons cost what they cost, and they're bloody worth it. They really are. They're so solid. They're so solid off the face, and they're just so well made. And it does, when you're looking at forward. I mean, that's why manufacturers have tried to move. Obviously through the 90s and through the 2000s. From a business perspective, if you're just running a business, you really want people to use cast clubs, because cast clubs, you can knock them out all day long, pull the metal in, polish them
but
up,
also
you
talked on it there. Sets of clubs. Okay, we've got less irons in a set that you would buy today, but off the rack, a set when I was 12 years of age has not materially changed versus today. Okay, there's less clubs in there and so on and so forth. But, I think it has stayed competitive. I think the whole idea that golf's an accessible game, I think, going all out and loads of new clubs clearly is. But the cost of a new set of irons hasn't gone completely radically away. And I think part of that is having a more efficient production flow. I think that needs to be flagged. That said,
Yeah, it does. But I think in
yeah,
the forge stuff has got quite expensive. But
yeah, of course.
anyway, I'm not bashing the manufacturers. I think I'm just with, you won't see in this rack behind me, other than Mura's, you really won't see any forge clubs from from sort of 2000 onwards.
Can you talk about some of the characters? So because you talked about, some of the people who would kind of finish off the look and that highly skilled piece around how you take a forged iron and then bring it to life with, the final touches. These people are still making clubs, aren't they, today?
Yeah, I have you ever watched that movie, Jiro Dreams of Sushi?
No.
That's brilliant. It's about this guy that's got this Michelin-starred sushi restaurant in an underground station in Tokyo, and the guy's just, it's like this. I can't remember what they call it. Is it shin? There's a name for it in Japanese culture, but it's this thing of like, if you go and work in a sushi restaurant, you're gonna wash dishes for 12 years before you get to cut a piece of fish. It's
the puffer fish. The was it kugu or something like that?
Yeah.
You have to train for something like 50 years to be able to prepare that dish. 15
Yeah,
years
it's
or
like
something
a
stupid.
lifetime of
It's a lifetime dedication to that craft, which Japanese
mastery.
culture seems to be quite big in. Massive stereotype perhaps there, but they seem to have this thing about this huge craft that you'll dedicate your life to. And some people, that's the construction of irons. But there's also guys in the States as well that do this.
There are, and I've been lucky enough to do a couple of trips to Japan and to visit some of these foundries and to meet some of the characters and watch them work. And that skill of being able to hand shape a head and to be able to knock a set of irons out which are truly matched. If you really get into looking at these things and you're looking at set progression and that crucial part of the set, which is when the set goes from the 7-iron through the 8-iron and everything. They are, and you're doing it by hand, and you're doing it on that wheel, which is removing significant amounts of metal. I mean, if I can do sole grinds, and I've got a bit of a knack for doing that, and I wouldn't say it took me a massive amount of time to learn it. Really, I watched them, and I wrecked a few clubs, and then I got decent at it. But I mean, it's pretty nerve wracking. I've done a custom grind, 2 sets of custom grinds on my Mura blades here. And if you make a mistake, that whole set's dead. I mean, you need to be at least 3 pints in before you can even think about it. And, it's like hitting the dance floor. But it's, it's a pretty nerve-wracking process. And once you get into trying to do the top line of the head and the toe shape, I mean, it's a crazy amount of skill. I went out to this foundry for this brand called Zodia, and this guy Chiba-san just sit there all day like this at the wheel with a dart on his mouth, just banging out. And at the time he was banging out, actually at the time he was banging out Yonex forgings, when Yonex had a brief spell where they had Ryo Ishikawa on the books, where they just made great stuff for about 2 years, in about 2000 and late 2000s, 2008, 2009. They made a blade called an E-Zone blade, Yonex E-Zone blade. This is a bit of a tip. If you find on eBay a set of Yonex E-Zone blades, buy them. Nobody knows what they are, and they are hand finished by Chiba-san. They are proper, like,
that market price has now changed immediately.
Yeah. I've got a couple of sets on ice, and I used those for a while. But yeah, I mean, fantastic stuff. So there is this real skill, and the other thing that's quite interesting, I think, is going back to that culture in Japan, and something that I've observed is that the Japanese forgings are very different from the great American forgings. And the important thing to say here is that great American forging kind of came to an end when there was a forging house called the Hoffman Forge, which was the last forging house in America, and it's where Titleist used to make their blades. So I'm sure you'll remember Titleist 690s, Titleist 681s, all that stuff. They were made at the Hoffman Forge, but then Titleist took a decision just after the Titleist 690 to move all their forging to China, and the Hoffman Forge literally filed for bankruptcy the day after. So that was the end. And the stuff that would come out of the US was not didn't I would say, you know, don't want to upset anyone, but it didn't have quite the same level of precision as the stuff that would come out of Japan. But there was the great hand shapers in the US. There was far more collaboration with the great players. So that golden era when, you know, Clay Long was designing for McGregor, Don White was doing the hand finishing, Tad Moore was doing stuff for Max Fly. You know, who else would there be?
They would be doing stuff with the players. So the guys would be,
and
like,
yeah,
Nicholas would be getting into the process. I mean, I know Hogan, when he sort of hung up his boots and he had obviously the club business, and you know the Ben Hogan club franchise better than anyone probably, but
yeah,
you know that he was, I get the sense that he was deeply involved way back then
all
in
those
the
players
process of the construction of those clubs.
yeah, so they would have a rapport with their club maker that would be much closer to the rapport that they might have with their coach these days. So those guys would, you know, before TrackMan we had divots, you know, they would understand things about turf interaction. They would understand about, you know, the type of shape of sole that that player might want. And there would be a much bigger conversation between player and the shaper than there is today. And, you know, somebody like Don White would know exactly how Jack Nicklaus wanted his irons.
You talked about them on the very first pod we did, actually, sat in that room. Do you remember? I think you just got them off eBay.
There they are. So, yeah, he, you know, Jack Nicklaus very big on the straight leading edge. I like the straight leading edge. There was this amazing moment where it was like towards the end of American Forging, I guess. But I would have been an assistant pro at Stoke Poges at this time, and I never forget that McGregor produced a catalogue, and it was when Don White still worked at McGregor, and they had this program where you could take the McGregor forgings, these ones, and you could actually specify. You could say, right, I want the straight leading edge, I want the curved lead. You had 3 options for the leading edge. You had 3 options for the toe shape. You had 3 options for the top line, and you had an option on offset, and they would make the heads for you. I mean,
wow.
Well, I mean,
that's crazy. That doesn't exist at all anywhere, right?
No,
today.
No, I mean, people have tried, but it's
unless your
very
name's Adam Scott, you haven't got enough pulling power to be able to
people
start
can,
dictating that stuff.
National Custom are basically that they're keeping American forgings alive. You know, you can go to National Custom and you can get the shapes that you're looking for, and then, you know, so the thing, that's what I'm trying to say about the US is, like, much more collaboration with player, much more, and as a result, actually probably deeper knowledge and deeper flexibility in terms of player interaction, turf interaction. You know, you have people like Bernard Langer who turn around and say, I want all my Wilson blades to have the same amount of offset as my Ping 1 iron. You know, some players loved offset. Curtis Strange, I've got his McGregor Murrayman blades over there, and they've got a ton of offset on them. So players were much more aware. Thanks, Sully. Sorry, just getting a cup of tea. Thanks,
refreshments coming in.
So players were much more aware, much more collaborative with the club maker, and that led to much more variety in the signs and in the designs. Then when you go to Japan, the thing that I really noticed in Japan, and some of the fascinating stuff about that, was that you would have these master craftsmen. You know, do you remember that scene in Kill Bill where she gets the Hattori Hanzo blade and it's like he hands it over, it's like a ceremony over the fire, you know? So you have these master craftsmen who make these amazing clubs and have a very clear picture in their head of what a golf club should be, and then the master player kind of takes them from that club maker with a certain amount of reverence and goes and does his thing with them. So there's a bit more separation, and they've gone in different directions, and it's fascinating, you know, without getting too nerdy, to do a bit of a deep dive into that. Because I remember when on one of my trips to Japan, when we were working with Zodia, and I was trying to talk to this guy through an interpreter, and one of the things that really bothered me, I don't know if you remember, I was using these ones, the Zodia blades that I still use. You know, my simulator clubs now, but I was using them outdoors for a while. And
played with them at West Byfleet, I think you did.
Yes, I did. Yeah. And I was noticing that the short irons would have more offset, and I couldn't get my head around that. It really bothered me. I was like, love the shape of these heads. I mean, those Zodias, the shape of those is just insane, just gorgeous. But they would have the short irons have more offset, and he was saying, and just trying to do this for an interpreter with really kind of golf speak was difficult, but he was talking about center of gravity of the head versus the hosel, plus hand speed through impact and all of this stuff as to why they would put more offset on the short irons. And all I can say is that in practice, I've actually been surprised at how much from a hitting shot perspective, I've liked that offset in the short irons. Whereas all of the stuff coming out of America would be less offset in the short irons and more offset in the long irons.
That was always my understanding. You put that in to hold the ball in the air. So, I mean, again, now starting to think like if I was going out and looking, there's so much on there if you type in old bladed irons. And I guess how much of this is looks, how much is in this, you know, I think one of the first things I said to you was like, I can't hit blades. I'm not going to ball striker. And you're like, it's just bollocks, Sam. It's just bollocks.
Yeah. It's
like,
difficult
help
to
us
speak like that,
pick
really.
between the myths of like what people talk about and then what should people go hunting for.
Yeah, I mean, look,
some of this like iconic clubs. Is some of this like maybe trying to find a blade that's maybe like more of an iconic blade? Because are they more of a muchness perhaps? I don't know.
No, they're not. I mean, look, imagine a time. It's the late 80s, and you write to Mizuno, and they send you their catalog, and they send you a catalog which has got 12 different blades in it and one set of cavities. You know, it was brilliant. You know, those Mizuno catalogs. And who's our mate? Is it he was at our thing at the Open, David Greenshields? If you go to his Instagram, I think his Instagram is Mizuno DG. Maybe you can put this in the notes. But he's catalogued all of the great Mizuno forgings, and it's really good to look at that, because with Mizuno, I think what would happen is they would have a lot of interaction with their pros, and their pros would all want different things. So like Sandy Lyle was a TP11 guy. TP11 is a slightly wider sole, a rounded toe shape, what you're using, a little bit of offset. And then you'd get like the TP9 guys. So like Jose Maria Olazabal was the classic TP9 guy. TP9 for me is quite a long head, quite a thin head, very sharp sole. I was never a TP9 guy. When I was a kid, loads of people were playing TP9s. TP19, the classic Faldo blade, is the rounded toe, sharp top line, quite sort of compact.
How do these
chunky
things make a difference? So obviously the
They're
sharp
just
leading edge means it's going to dig
it's-
the turf. So if you're steep, you know, it's old, it's not really as forgiving through the ball. But then the top line and the toe, that's just aesthetics, right?
It's just preference, yeah. It's preference. But the thing is, I mean, let's just not forget, a lot of times now, because it's all become a bit homogenized, players, I think you speak to a lot of good players, and they might not even be able to tell you what their preference was. Whereas if you go back to the 80s, good players be like, oh, I want it to look this way, you know. And it always makes me laugh. My mate Lee Porter's good on this. You know, if you take great club makers and players who are really into equipment, watch the way they look at clubs. You know, the way they kind of, sometimes they'll shut one eye and they'll really look at the lines, and you know, they'll really.
You always say you can tell like a proper player looks at a club a different way.
Lee does this thing where he kind of gets it up in the air, puts his glasses down, and like gets it over there and looks at it from the heel, looking across the club, and some people like the killed leading edge, all that stuff. So, but having that preference and being as engaged in that in your equipment is a beautiful part of the game. You know, I would encourage anyone to try and get more into it, because it's I think it really enhances the love for the game, and also it gives you something to do, which is all about golf when you're not actually playing golf. So that's what we all need. Obviously, we're going to have thriving families and all that stuff. So it's so I'd say people should look at all through the Mizuno stuff. I mean, one of my particular favorites. People think that a lot of people say the Mizuno TN87, which is actually a model they never made here, which never branded TN87, was the greatest one. And actually, it's the same head as the Mizuno MP29, which is the one that Tiger used when he first turned pro before he moved over to Titleist. And he still had that MP29 2-iron in his bag all the way through. He didn't get rid of that. He left that in there. So TN87 stroke MP29, they're pretty nice. And they also made one called a TP2000, which is supposed to be the same head as the TN87, but I've got a set here that I got recently, and I don't think they are really. I think they're a bit different. And they still kind of go for proper money. Now, having said all of that, I'm not really a Mizuno guy.
Right.
I think it's a good place to start. No, I'm a sort of Bridgestone J's I thought were just fabulous. You know, proper the Japanese Bridgestone stuff. Bridgestone J's were a bit like
Bridgestone
the
J,
original.
what's that? As in the letter J or J-A-Y?
No, it's just Bridgestone. I don't know why I've not looked at the history of why they called it. So Bridgestone J's were, it was like a high end bit of Bridgestone. You can see there it just says JS on
Nice.
it. And professional weapon. These were just. I mean, I remember I used to have lessons with Lawrence Farmer, and he had these, and I was like, what the hell are they? You know, proper clubs. I've got the cavities from these would have been like early 90s. I've got the cavities and the blades. Caveat to these, a lot of offset. I'm not really an offset guy, and they do have a lot of offset. And I've got a set of the blades that have got a ton of offset, and I built them up. I actually built them to a really nice spec, but when I used them, I just hit them absolutely terrible. I love the look of them, but I hit them terrible. And then you get our friend Richard from West Byfleet. He's got
Two-time on the pod.
Yeah, we were chatting the other day, and he's got a set of the J's from they resurrected it they called it the J33, and made a beautiful blade. And he got a set of those. He asked me not to bid on them when he sent me a WhatsApp. We've got a little code now that if one of you saw it
Well, that's
first,
the
the other's
thing.
not allowed
Yeah,
to bid.
you have to have a little thing where and it's the same in the FootJoy Classics and stuff like that. You start looking at these things, and it's the same bunch of guys in Britain that are all bidding against the same thing.
Exactly.
There needs to be some sort of cartel. So how much should you be paying for these, and how much tinkering should you be doing? Because
there's a couple of sets.
You're basically buying them in whatever shaft because it's just like, I want a mint head, and then just accept that you're going to spend £100 on some dynamic golds or something to put in them.
I think so. There's a few sets of There's a few sets of J33s on eBay at the moment that I'm watching, and then they're not, a couple of £100, or they're pretty cheap. I think so. That's the best way to do it. I mean, I've been doing sets up recently for a project that we're doing in Sounder. So this is a set of, one of the other classic blade, really, if you want something that, if you're willing to play something which I suppose is hard to hit in inverted commas, but Maxfly Australian blades. I've got a set.
What does Australian blade really mean as well? I've got no idea what that is.
The Australian blade came out of. It's actually, I was looking. There's a video on YouTube which is the history of the Australian blade. It kind of started out through Lee Trevino, really, which is he was working with Dunlop and working on head designs, and then I think goes into Peter Thompson, and later on people like Craig Parry would have played Australian blades. And I mean, when I was a kid, the Australian blade was the original butter knife, really thin, really nice shape.
So it's like an extreme version of a blade.
Yeah, DP30 was the one. They're the ones that I've managed to get, which are in a box, still in the box they were delivered in. But this is you can see here, TM92. So this Australian blade, this is the one that was actually made by Tab Moore and was the last forging that Maxfly Dunlop, or Maxfly I should say, made. They went over to cast irons after this. And these are, talk about kissing frogs, right? When these came in, I've been looking for a set for ages. The shape of them, they are so beautiful. They're so perfect. I absolutely love them. I haven't taken them outdoors yet. Now, the caveat with these is they're traditional lofts. So the pitching wedge is 51 degrees, and the 6-iron is basically a 7-iron loft. But the head weights are not very heavy. So even though I'm adjusting that, I've rebuilt these with our sharp, the Project XLS. You're the IO actually, but so I've rebuilt them. I've MOI matched them and everything. But the heads are quite light, so I couldn't. You'd almost want to use the 6-iron as the 7-iron. But I can't make it 7-iron length because there just isn't enough weight in the head. So really with these, I'm accepting that I'm playing them at much higher lofts. So
you just readjust. The numbers on the sole really start to lose. There's no point comparing them with other sets anyway, and that's always the case. Right.
Well, yeah, and all I've done is I've built the 3-iron. So this set of irons for me is 3-iron to wedge, but that's all I've got to add to that is really a sand wedge. So the wedge is kind of a gap wedge.
But that would be a real connoisseur's pick that you're holding there. That would not be
so good.
£80 set of blades that you stumble across on eBay.
No, if you want £80, then stick to the Mizunos, I reckon. Stick to the Mizunos. I mean, some of those.
TP11's got a lot of offset in, but they're cool. They're a lovely iron to look at. I love those. I think they feel lovely off the face.
set of TP19s or Ram Tour grinds. Great blade. You know, that's a good one actually. I've got two sets of those I'm looking at now. Ram Tour grind. I played those when I was a kid. Beautiful shape. They have got a bit of offset, but they've also got quite a deep face. So that's the classic blade that Tom Watson used, and they're fabulous.
So
And
those are sort of like some of the more sort of like entry level. You're not going to sort of so they're nice.
If you want something that these are the old Greg Norman, not that we like Greg Norman very much, but the old Cobra Greg Norman blade. So Cobra made this blade. I think it was just called a Tour blade. And when Greg Norman got signed to Cobra, he asked them to go to Don White at McGregor and have some made. So these are the ones with Tour on the hosel, which are slightly different. They've got a slightly longer hosel. Now the thing to say about these is these are the original Punishers. They are like, look at the see how it's got the reverse muscle. So they get thicker
Yeah,
at the
there's
top.
more at the top end.
Yeah, really high center of gravity. So these things are just bullets, and really sharp sole. I've been hitting them on the sim a bit. And remember the old satin Project X shafts? I've put those in there, and they've redone all the paint and everything, so they're pretty nice. Now, one more thing on this before we finish on irons is that if you want a forgiving golf club and you want it to play nicely, you've got to look at the old ping stuff. You know, I've been making some hangover sets recently, and this is the ultimate hangover set here, is the Ping ISI nickel.
Yeah, so I was going to talk about this. I hit the Ping 1-iron with Di Thomas from our recent podcast from the Worcestershire. The offset in that 1-iron is absolutely outrageous. The shaft is on your left heel and the head is back on the right foot somewhere. It's nuts. But they're big headed, aren't they? They're really iconic, very different looking head. I remember loads of people playing those when I was growing up, guys at the golf club that may be a bit older. I remember one guy had these really weird iron covers that were like sort of leather clip-ons. He's actually a current captain of Blackwell.
Unforgivable.
I know, but they weren't actually unforgivable like iron covers. They were actually quite cool in a way. They were like really weird. But anyway, we digress. Those old pings that you're talking about there, you'd keep an eye out for those.
Yeah, so Ping ISI
Carsten.
nickels. I mean, Ping ISI nickels, when I was in the pro shop game, so this is going back to my first job at Flackwell Heath, when they came out, the nickel ones, they were 2,200 quid a set made out of nickel. And you see them on eBay now, and it's as if people have forgotten they're made from nickel. You can pick them up really cheap. I'm going to make a set for my dad, and I made a set for a friend of ours recently with Diamana graphite shafts in a brilliant set of clubs. I mean, if you were really struggling in the morning, that's what you want. And the other one to look out for is the original Ping i2. So you've got to be careful with the Ping i2s because you've got the square groove issue. So if you go back, so when you look at Ping i2s, there's the later models, which are the ones with the plus in the corner. They have a completely different sole grind. So it's like a thinner sole, and it's like a concave at the back. They're nowhere near as good as the original Ping i2s, which have the fatter sole. And I think don't quote me on this. No, it's the same shape as what people will remember as the classic Ping i2, but it's a thicker sole. I'll send you.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, this stuff. Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, without the plus. Right now, with those, you have to look out because you see where it's got the Carsten writing along the top of the cavity.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain way up that the writing has to be for them to be the legal ones, and you've got to just check that.
So at the moment, you'd have to hold the iron upside down to read Carsten.
Yeah, I can't remember which way it is though, so I'm not. But we can put it in the notes. But those original Ping i2s, including the wedges, so they're the wedges that with the thicker sole that loads of tour players were using, and our mate Andrew Marshall uses them still. And they produced a version of it recently because that was the one that Phil Mickelson was using, and that was why Roger Cleveland made that PM wedge. That's basically a Ping i2 wedge. Roger Cleveland was struggling to make him a decent wedge, and he got him the PM one. I think if you want a set of cavities, if you turn up with a set of beryllium Ping i2s or a set of nickel ISIs, I think you can hold your head up high.
Any more comments to round out the discussion on irons? Because I think wedges, I mean, this is already going to be a 2-part podcast. So anything else to round out on irons before we move to wedges? Because what I'm taking from that is Bridgestone J's, you can't go too far wrong if you want blades going into some different Zuno ones, pick them based on look, take them to a guy to get them tinkered around, get the line lofts right, maybe tinker around with the grips, or maybe even consider dropping some shafts in. Look for the heads that haven't got too much wear, or just
I
look
think
for some
look for
nice
heads that
clean
haven't
grooves.
got look for heads that haven't got too much wear. Don't buy anything that's been refurbished. This is crucial. So the problem with having heads refurbished is that the person, generally speaking, there's a couple. I reckon there's probably, there's 2 or 3 people in the world that can do a decent job of this. But what ends up happening is this person doing the refurbishing, when they basically put them on the grinding wheel to get off of all the dings, they ruin the shape of the heads.
Okay.
They ruin
so just
them.
accept the dinks, love them for the dinks.
Yeah,
but
try and get an original set.
Clean grooves.
But also make sure you look closely at the hosels. So there is a real delicate art to doing loft and lies on clubs. I know now that we've got these loft and lie machines, people look at it and they think you clamp it in there and you bend it here and it's pretty easy. There is actually a real knack to it, and the key with it is making sure that you are bending it in the right place, that it's clamped in the right way, it's all lined up properly. And generally speaking, if you get these old sets, sometimes they've been a bit butchered on the loft and lie machine. If somebody that doesn't know exactly what they're doing has put them in the loft and lie machine and moved them about, they can really screw them up. One of the things that you see quite a lot is that people have tried to make them into modern lofts, and then they've got loads of offset. They're really hard to put them right. There are some masters out there that can put these things right. I mean, when you look at the people like Don White, he won't go near a loft and lie machine. He has a really solid wooden worktop with a load of jigs and different shapes and a big heavy lead mallet, and he's whacking them about, moving the hosel and getting them to look exactly right. And there are people that can do that, but there's not many of them about anymore.
It's pretty elite stuff, though.
Yeah, it's not many
but
about.
Some of the you touched on it with the ping. So moving into the wedges, some of them had this, because you used to buy the sets 3 to sand. It was always my understanding with clubs, 3 to sand wedge. And the notion of a gap wedge is a fairly recent addition, I think. Anyway, I'm happy to be corrected on that. My understanding was pitching wedge, sand wedge. People loaded the bag up top with, always had a 3-iron, but then you had 3 wood, 5 wood. The selection now, I play 2 woods and a driving iron, and then 4. But I've got 4 wedges in the bag or whatever. It's what we have today is very, very different.
Yep.
But how much of that is driven by what's been produced versus what's the demand of the golfer?
I think what's happened today is that the commercial aspect has gone down the route of, your wedges are just, you got to get your right lofts and you've got to get your distance gaps. So it's like all golfers are buying a Vokey wedge or whatever other wedge it might be. The design of those wedges, because it's been a bit homogenized, and they're sort of saying that everybody should be using the same wedges. I mean, Cleveland are producing some wedges that are much easier to hit, but those wedges are way more difficult to use than some of the old wedges that we would have been given as part of a set years ago when we bought 3-iron sand wedge. I mean, if you
Feels
take
that way now, sure.
When I've had the severe heebie-jeebies,
Bronzy chip
I've got
master?
Bronzy chip. I've never quite gone there, but take this as an example. So this is a Bridgestone wedge, which is actually a J. These were the Jumbo Ozaki MTN3 Pro model.
They were big heads, weren't they? These were really big heads.
Big round head, load of offset, thick sole. And this is a tour player club. These things are so easy to hit. They are so easy to use. If I'm having issues, or even sometimes just in the winter when it's really muddy, I'll just take these wedges out.
What are you saying, to an extent, for the guy that plays once a week, the advent of different grinds and soles and all the bounce stuff and all the Vokey stuff, if anything, it's actually it's almost like a solution looking for a problem.
It's harder.
It's made it harder because it's kind of got really intricate when people don't need intricacy. They actually just need something highly functional.
Yeah, so sand wedges.
Old wedges don't look good.
Yeah, Gene Saracen was the original sand wedge guy, I think, wasn't he? But take this one. So Wilson Staff Tour Blade. These are the old JP2 models. So, these are the sort of classic. It says sand wedge on the bottom. It's kind of a 56 degree. I picked this up on eBay for about 30 quid. I mean, you can say they don't look good. I mean, it's always something that you can kind of get used to. But this has got a load of offset. It's got a really rounded leading edge. You know, if you're just looking to flop one onto the green, this thing is so easy to hit. So it's worth exploring the older wedges, and it's worth just thinking about what it's worth thinking about wedges in terms of what you really want them to do. Now, again, the good thing with wedges is you can buy old wedges on eBay for no money, like no money, and you know, yeah, you probably need to do a bit of work on them, but you know, I was surprised with this one. It's really heavy head, and it came in quite long, so it's crazy swing weight. But I've cut it down. I've put a new grip on it. Totally playable club. So I think it's worth. I mean, the Cleveland. If you go,
The
if you look at like
588 was a big club, wasn't it, for that
Cleveland
time?
588. I mean, these are truly great wedges. I mean, I remember when, you know, mates would go off to the US and they come back and it'd be like in the US they were only selling like 3 to pitching wedge, and then people would buy these extra wedges. And don't forget, you know, 588 was really, again, just as really kind of just as Tiger, just probably just before Tiger came along. And originally when Tiger first came on tour, he was using 588 wedges. I always found it interesting that he always went wedge 56 60, massive gap. But this 588, I would argue that there is no wedge made since that surpasses it. You know, there are wedges which have different characteristics that work better for different styles of player and different people, but this wedge is such a good wedge. And
why,
you know,
though?
recently,
Why you say that? What is it about it? Is it because it's got a versatile soul, or is it because it's got, because you don't always want loads of bounce and you don't always want no bounce? So, you know, what makes a good wedge? I've got no
well, so you've got
idea.
talk about bounce. I mean, bounce is a number, so it's quite easy from a selling of golf equipment perspective because it's a linear thing. But think about shape of sole as well. And Roger Cleveland, you know, total. Roger Cleveland was a persimmon master, but he was also just a total one of the greats when it comes to wedges. I would say, you know, take somebody like Don White. He's a great shaper, but he's not necessarily the person that has the dialogue with the player and really gets stuck into the golfing perspective and the connection to the player, and you know, probably hitting a lot of wedge shots himself, which Roger Cleveland is. And the 588 series, basically, he has each of the lofts. He's kind of looked at it and said that has a specific purpose. So if you look at the shape of the 56, the 56 it's a sole shape which has a lot less camber, so it's quite flat here. It has the heels kind of taken away a little bit, but it's really a club that he's kind of saying, right, you're going to use this a bit for pitching, but you're also, it needs to be good out of the bunkers.
Yeah.
So it's a sole grind which is kind of geared up for the bunkers. And then if you take this is a tour issue 588 lob wedge. I think this was actually David Howell's.
This is where you get loads of heel relief, so you can
Yeah, heel relief,
face,
but also
open it
lot of camber, right? Very rounded. So this club
you can press
is
hands
a club.
forwards, you can drop the hands back.
Also, because of the camber, right? It's not going to grab the turf. So you know when you hit an iron shot, and the club pinches, you can feel the club hit the turf and get that resistance on the turf. That is what gives you that kind of second bit of deceleration stroke acceleration, because what you're getting there is it gives you that compression, it gives you that shoot of the ball forwards, which actually comes from the sole of the club kind of digging into the turf, which just gives you that brief moment. It's pretty elite, this, when you think about it, but it gives you that brief moment of kind of accelerating the center of gravity forward and gives you that and that shoot forward and that bit of power. And with a lob wedge, you really don't want that. What you want with a lob wedge is for the club not to lose any speed as it goes underneath the ball. So for it just to skim through the turf, because the more it skims through the turf, the more spin you're going to have. So this sole grind with a lot of camber, it really does zip through the turf. Another sole grind, which is interesting, is the old, well, it's not old, it's a current one, isn't it? Titleist K grind. So Vokey does a grind called a K grind, which is very much geared up around people on sort of US tour who are hitting those shots from over bunkers where the rough's really long and grabby. If you take a Vokey K grind, which is a big, wide, cambered sole, that thing will just pop out of heavy rough like better than any wedge, because it just won't.
And
It's got
spin a bit.
minimal. Yeah, it's slippery. It slips through the turf. So you've got it's a fascinating thing to really start looking at different wedges and different wedge grinds. And a great way to explore it is to do it through buying old wedges for 20, 30, 40 quid off eBay and playing around with them. But, really try and understand it. And sadly, it's dark arts, and it's a big chunk of knowledge which is sort of going away a little bit at the moment. There's not really people coming up behind these great hand shapers who are carrying the torch, unfortunately. But yeah, if
So
you're
what do
going
you do
old
when you're
on,
building a set? I mean, do you if you're buying the set and it's 3 to sand, do you just stick at it with the sand wedge? Do you maybe spend £30 on like a contingency Hail Mary, sort of like a little, oh well, I'll buy this 588 and put that in, and I might drop the sand wedge. Who knows? Let's get 15 clubs. Or do you go and try and throw a 60-degree at it? I remember I had a carbide. Do you remember those as a kid?
well, there's the Cobalt. You think the Tom Watson one?
It was called Carbide. That was the brand.
That was,
I think they were really crap.
they're like sandpaper.
They had like
faces,
sandpaper faces. Yeah. So it's spun. Just absurd.
Yeah,
I'm sure
mad.
they're illegal.
Tearing balls up. I think it's quite nice if you're going to play the retro set. It's quite nice to explore going back to having less wedges. So I think, say if you get a set of Mizunos and you've got the sand wedge with the set, those Mizuno sand wedges are pretty good. But also maybe consider looking out for a Cleveland 588 56, or even the old Wilson Staff JP 56. See how you get on with that. It's interesting because if you get a really versatile 56, and you carry one less club, and you've got something you need to be a bit creative with around the greens with, and just explore whether that gives you a different type of pleasure. Sometimes I think what happens when we've got almost like a club for every yardage, and it's all a bit numbers driven, that actually stifles our creativity. It goes back to that thing of, I think it's a good idea to play without yardages sometimes, and just kind of look at it and hit it. I mean, we're using retro equipment. It's also quite nice to explore a retro way of playing. And
yeah, but we're in a unique space of golf, aren't we? I think I can't do the maths on my head, but there's only a finite number of people that will have been used to playing a meaningful amount of golf pre-rangefinder or pre-distance measuring. And yet now I can't play without a rangefinder. Like, just being really, if I'm playing competitively or trying to score, it's become such a crutch. And yeah, I've only put one in the bag in the last 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years, maybe a bit longer. But
well, Jeff Ogle
played most of my time looking at, oh, there's the 150 post. That feels like a 7-iron.
Jeff Ogilvy says it's a bit like sat nav. Most of us can't find our way around anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's similar with rangefinders. I think we just get really dependent on them, and it's nice to. In my opinion, it's very nice sometimes to go out and play the game in as much of a minimal way as you possibly can. So a few less clubs, maybe some retro gear, and dump the rangefinder, and just get out there and just try and hit the shots. There's something very satisfying about being able to look at a target and just hit a shot that goes the right distance. And to be honest with you, it's very surprising how quickly you will get back into that and pick it up. In the same way as, I can remember when I first started thinking about using persimmon and stuff like that, be like, oh God, am I having a lesser experience because I'm not able to hit the shots I can hit with modern kit? And actually you do lose a bit, but you also pick up a load of other stuff that you don't know that before you try it, that you're going to pick up. So it's
beneficial for your game, would you say? Improves your overall game, even if you play, like, I don't want to get too evangelical about this, but like, even if you play it a dozen times through a year, or you just go out in an evening with some retro gear, you can pick up things that are beneficial for when you go and play the Stableford with the modern club.
Well, the game improvement clubs are the clubs that are the hardest to hit. It's as simple as that, because they make you hit it good. So, if take persimmon drivers, for example, I mean, if you go out and play persimmon driver, you get very into making sure you hit the absolute middle of the face. So you get very into the precision of it. And that's good. That's really good for your game. And similarly, like I've said to you before, if I'm not putting well, I don't go and find a mallet or some sort of ghastly MOI balance head that's designed for putting towards the sky with. I go out and I get my napper and make myself strike putts properly, and that gets me back on track with my putting. So it's you do have to question some of the prevailing wisdom, and I think that being able to just experiment and hit. The first time I started playing again without a rangefinder, it's a few years back. It's when I was a member of Stoke Park, and I went out after the round with my rangefinder and just walked over to some of the spots I'd hit certain clubs from. And there's no way I would have hit that club from there if I had my rangefinder. But I hit it pin high and hit a good shot.
Yeah.
So there's again, like you say, without getting too evangelical, there's one of the lovely things about playing golf, if you can just let go a little bit, is that when we hit a great shot, it reminds us of what we're capable of when we get into that bit of our brain that isn't necessarily the bit with the words and the conscious thought. And that's one of the real sort of values of the game. And sometimes having too many things, too many swing thoughts, too many systems, too many clubs, too many yardages, too many
There's too many
stats,
conscious things you're thinking about.
it takes away massively from getting to that kind of core benefit of playing golf. And it's like, we all sort of have to ask ourselves a little bit, why do we play? It's easy to get caught up in this thing of, I'm chasing marginal gains and I want to be like the pros or whatever. But if you really ask yourself deep down, you want to go out there and hit. Personally, I'm not saying that everybody should be doing the same thing, but personally, I love hitting shots. Like, that's why I play. I'm more about hitting shots than I am scoring, to be honest with you. It's shameful, isn't it? But I love hitting shots, and like when we play, we get excited about hitting shots. We're regularly having to walk off of shots because we're just too excited.
The Blackwell members and guests was a particular favourite. I left you 260 into a par 5, and you were like, I've just got to step off this. I'm a bit too involved here, Sam. I'm a bit overexcited. Does that excitement extend to putters? Let's talk about putting. You mentioned strike, by the way, and I've putted with a mallet since really first days of having an Odyssey Rossi. To generally always then just said I'm a mallet putter guy, whatever. TaylorMade sent through the TP putter, which I really like the look of. Thought never going to get on with this because I'd bought like an old Scotty Del Mar, I think, years and years ago, and just felt, as much as it looked great, I couldn't putt with the thing. And I've played really well with that blade putter now, and I'm sort of like, I can never see a world where I'd go back to a mallet. But the one thing putting with a blade putter tells you is strike. I had no appreciation for how important strike is with a putter.
Yeah, well, and if you go into the Wilson 8802s and Scotty Cameron Nappers, the proper old blades, that's even more so, because the interesting thing about those blades is, there's no sight line, then they're pretty difficult to aim. So you really do have to kind of connect the start position with the strike, and really the big challenge with them is being able to let go enough just to strike it nicely and kind of hope for the best. And then it's always surprising how well you are able to putt if you can just let go a little bit. You can't hang on with those putters at all. There's no crutch. And I am a big believer in that. I see some of the putt. I mean, I know Brian Harman won the Open, didn't he, with that absolute monster of a thing. But each their own, really. I think that you do give up a bit of the experience. A good example is those lab putters, which like Adam Scott's using, and what's his name, the guy that did well in the FedEx, who won the US, Lucas Glover, really attributes his success in the late part of this season to that putter. When I've been in Orlando at the trade show, the PGA show, he's a really interesting person, the guy that designed that putter. And the concept behind it, which is that the face is balanced to the stroke. I mean, if you talk to that guy for 5 minutes, you will never be able to look at a face balance putter again. Face balance putters are the worst bit of logic ever. It's like plausible story, but yeah, whatever. It's like you put it on your finger and the face points at the sky. It's like, well,
I had
great,
one for ages. Centre shot to two ball. Had it for ages.
If I was putting straight up towards the sky, that would be great, but I'm not. I'm putting down there at an angle, and that's actually very unstable down there. So he's come up with this technology where the face is actually, you have to order them at the exact lie angle that you want to play it at, because the face of the putter is balanced to the lie angle of the shaft. So it's balanced to actually where you putt. But it's a fabulous bit of technology, and he's a brilliant engineer, and he's worked it all out. But if you use one of those putters, especially the mallet ones, it's like operating a piece of machinery. It really sort of takes you out of it. It's, you know, if I get this thing lined up and I move it back and I let it go, it's going to, and it does take away a little bit from the experience and the pleasure of playing and hitting shots and hitting putts. So,
so if you're, see, I mean, really, I think if you're building a set in the sort of the guise of what we spent the last hour and a half talking about, you know,
yeah,
Joe Palperson and Woods, you know, Zuno blades, 588 wedges and stuff. You've got to go with something that gives you the experience, and you know, is all fairly pared back, right? Being pared back is what good
I think so. I think so. Unless you want to try and find a Ram Zebra.
What about those Wilson 8813s? I'm certain I used to mess around with one of those on a carpet as a kid. I mean, it's a nice looking putter. Is it just a bit too minimal? You pick
8813,
I think, can't you?
I've got a pretty good hit rate here, Sam. Every time we mention a club, I can pull it out from just behind me. 8802 is the.
What's the difference, 8802 and 8813?
I don't really know.
Because these are contenders. They're both. I mean, Mickelson used to putt with one, not that brand. I think he had Yonex, didn't he, or whatever.
It was a Yonex, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
to me, the 88. I mean, somebody might be able to tell us what the difference is, but I'm looking at an 8802 and an 8813, and they look exactly the same. They really don't look any different. I don't know what the difference is, but yeah, that's the original blade shape. That's what the Scotty Cameron Napa is based on. Try and find one of those. They are a bit scary. I would encourage
Scotty Cameron
everyone...
Napa.
Yeah, but they're mega money.
I was going to say that's a lot of dough, isn't it? So that would be like a real big. That'd be a real big punt. Okay, so what's that? So what we're just explain what we're looking at here.
Bullseye. I mean, the pleasure of putting with a bullseye. I went. Where did I go? Oh, I went to play at Woking, and it's when you were at Walton Heath for the ladies, wasn't it?
Yeah, you played with Stokes, didn't you?
Yeah,
and
I really thought that the greens at Woking were going to be lightning fast, and I've got a beautiful old bullseye La Femme. Which I love using, and I thought, fast greens, I'm going to take my bullseye, and actually they weren't fast. They'd had some work done on them, and it was pretty hard to get that.
The
thing
whole
working.
Of Surrey had their work done to their greens that week, I think.
Yeah, and so the thing with the bullseye is it's the original, like it's as if the shaft is just going straight into the sweet spot of the putter. You know, so you can really get a great feeling strike from out of the bullseye. So I think have a look at the bullseyes. Very hard. I mean, to consider, like, I've got one of the original Newport Scotty Camerons here with the old Terillium insert.
That would be a lot of money, wouldn't it?
Yeah, this one's not in very good condition, but
you can go 2,000 plus on a Scotty very easily.
Well, the T stamps, yeah, but the original kind of ones like that, you've probably got to spend 500 quid. The niche putter that I think is pretty undervalued and underrated is to consider the old Max Fly Tabmore putters. Remember that? It's probably a bit before your time, Sam, but everyone definitely. Everyone on tour used that putter. Max Fly Tabmore, solid lump, really nice putters. There are a few. TaylorMade had this little spell. Again,
oh yeah, that's nice.
TaylorMade were really good in the early 2000s. So these Rossers, I think it was when they had Dave Stockton designing putters from. This one is a Rosser Monaco, and it's when they were doing the Kia Mar stuff, and it's got adjustable weights. I've even got the packet of weights, but luckily this has stayed in good condition because it was just sort of thrown around the back when TaylorMade, when we were basically sponsored by TaylorMade at the time. We were just being given stuff, and I sort of forgot about it, and I found it recently. It's actually a really nice putter. So
was there a putter that changed the game in the same way that the Great Big Bertha, the 588 wedges, you know, almost changed the game a little bit at the time? Was there a putter that,
well, the Ping Answer
40, 50, That was the one, was it? The ping
Oh
answer.
my
That was
God. I
enough.
mean, when the ping answer came out, it was actually pretty controversial, with the way that shaft was. And
Because
there
of the
was a
neck.
few
Is that like a swan neck? Is it whatever? What would you call that? Like the
plum, people call it a plumber's neck, don't they? But I mean, that's that putter when it came out was fairly controversial. And there's a weird story about Carsten Solheim did this thing with the top of the grip where the back of the grip came out and it gave you this extra bit of sort of face control, which they actually banned. So yeah, I would say the ping answer is probably the. Well, look at everyone imitates it now, don't they? I mean, Scotty Cameron hasn't had a lot of success with his own designs, but he's had a lot of success with other people's. I love Scotty Cameron, by the way. And yeah, probably the answer. And then there's a few mallets over the years have uh, that have had a lot of success. Remember the Nick Price used to use the Ram Zebra, and then he went to the
zebra was a
Bobby,
really big one. That was a
and he
great.
went to
I
that
really
Bobby
wanted
Grace.
that putter.
Bobby Grace, Zebra's back. They've restarted. They're making
Have
you
they?
get them come up on your Instagram ads probably. But the remember the Bobby Grace, the one that Nick Price won at Turnberry with Fat Lady Swings, when it had that like terraced back on it. I mean, there was a period of time where literally probably 50% of people on tour were
Probably
playing that
helped that he
putter.
held the world that week when he won.
Yeah, exactly.
I
He
mean,
used
he
to do that
looked
thing
at
where
it, he went in.
yeah. So yeah, there's some good stuff out there. I just think the Scottish stuff is really expensive now. So have a think about the Tadmors. I like the old Scotty studio designs, the black ones, really plain black ones that he did, which were still carbon steel, because Scotty Cameron doesn't make any carbon steel putters anymore because basically they rust. If people put them in the head cover wet, they'll rust and then they end up getting loads of returns. So they only do stainless steel putters now, which is a shame. I love carbon steel putters. I just think they're beautiful and nice. Don't know whether I think I noticed the feel, but it's always a bit subjective, isn't it? But yeah, it's nice to get back into something which is carbon steel.
James, we started this podcast an hour and a half ago, and I was 9 minutes away from closing the bid on that ping answer putter. It's
Did you do it or not?
an hour and a half later, and I won it. I got that for £23.09.
Very good. Well done. So that's just like an
and I
original
got
ping
I can't remember
answer.
what I paid for my Ram 5, my Cleveland 588 wedge either, but that was about 20 quid. So I'm going to round this out with the last 5 or 10 minutes we've got. How much feasibly can you build a meaningful set of clubs? Building in the fact you've got to pay a pro to do a bit of tinkering. I'm going to say you budget £100 in the top end of the bag, and that's oodles. You can pick up a really good set of irons for £150, maybe save £100 to sort of get them really running nice, and then another £75 or so for wedges, putters.
Where does that get you to, though?
What do you mean? What does that get you to?
What does that get you to in terms of the total? What you just said, 600?
250. You'd be 100 persimmon and top end of the bag. I think 250 for your irons, which is the big outlay. You're at 350, and then another 50 for putter and wedge or whatever. Potentially, you can bring it in on 400 for a really sick set of clubs, can't you?
You can. Then you've got to have a bit of work done on them, which is why I got to 600.
Well, I've budgeted 100 for a bit of work, but maybe I'm over egging it. But it can be done.
Yeah, it can be done for sure. You've got to think about the bag. I don't think you really want to be turning up at a retro day with your power caddy and your 14-way divider, which means probably there's a pretty active market on the Ping L8 bags, which has got about 4 people in it. Me, Sam Cooper, and Bledge probably
and Rob McGurk as well, who's got about 20 of the things.
Yeah, so I mean, you need quite a few of those because they do break quite easily. So, Ping LA, the niche bag, which I think was really cool. Do you remember the old vinyl collapsible ones? I've got one which is up on the wall. I'm not going to get it down. Yeah, people used to carry these sort of. They're like a small tour bag, but a carry bag, and they're quite collapsible. You just don't see them on eBay. I've got one there, which is the tightest one, which is not really. It's kind of a bit big and a bit heavy. I might bring that on Retro Day, but I'll probably bring one of my Ping L8s.
You probably need to save 25 quid for a decent sweatshirt if you come into the Retro Day on the 19th, don't you? A nice little sort of Faldo Pringle special.
Yeah, or you need an Aurus. You need something from. You need like preferably an Aurus from a Disney resort. I think is quite a good place to go, or an old Ashworth, or one of those old. You want one of the old. Remember Chris DeMarco and Freddie Couples, and they had the really long
Fabric
sleeves.
everywhere.
They'd all,
Like you'd
they'd all be
take
doing
off if there
this.
was a lot of wind.
They'd like waving their arms around and pulling their shoulders up before they hit a shot. Even a bit of that. Yeah, you got to kind of decide which area you're going for. And then really, what you're going to do. Come in with a set of molded trainer-like golf shoes. You need a pair of FootJoy Classic with some nails in, really, don't you?
You can get away from you, as you can attest to behind you.
I've spent 90 quid on a hat for our retro.
Have you?
Day. Yeah, it hasn't arrived yet. I bought it when I was on holiday. Yeah, it's an old Max Fly with the rope and the.
You've got that little Blades hat, that neon green thing. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
James, I've really enjoyed that. I've learned a stack. So whether this is a 1-part or a 2-part, I mean, it's going to be about the extent of an hour and 40, which we're drifting into Joe Rogan territory at that level. So it might be a 2-parter.
Nerdy golf
but
chat
if you're not going to,
minutes.
if you're not coming to the retro event, of which there are plenty of billions of people in the world who aren't, I do hope this has been a pretty interesting insight into the clubs that have changed the game a little bit, and some of the stuff that frankly I didn't even know. I never even knew to look out for half this stuff looking at golf clubs. That's been quality, mate, and thank you so much for joining the pod once again. I believe you are possibly our most capped guest now as well.
Oh well, what an honor. You must be mad. Well, thank you for having me again.
Well, we're scraping the barrel as always, but that's just the nature of this podcast.
Just got to keep them coming.